In this video, we're going to be exploring the entire complex here in Baalbek, including the temple, the Jupiter temple, and all of the surrounding area. I do feel that this is very important because a lot of people can't get to Baalbek and don't really understand what actually Baalbek is really all about. We do see a lot of ruins from the Romans, and we don't really get to see the underlying layers, and that's the reason why we are here in Baalbek. So if you are already familiar with my channel, you'll know that the reason for my work is the undertakings of the ancient civilization ×2, as I refer to it, that I believe was on Earth in the very distant past. This is predating the flood, and these people, cultures responsible, I believe, that built these megalithic monuments that we see scattered around the Earth. And this ancient civilization is, in my mind, no doubt the ancient gods of the ancient world. So not only will we be looking at the surface structures, we're going to be taking a look at the megaliths that this entire area is built upon, or at least a lot of the area is built upon. So unfortunately, due to time, obviously, I won't be able to go into detail as far as in depth of the megaliths and the idea of who built them and the ancient gods of the world. But you can check out other videos of our experience here in Baalbek, where I will be going into great detail the underlying structures. You will see them right now in this video, but the detail information about the actual building process that had to be taken place back in very, very ancient times before the Romans got here. So keep that in mind as you're walking through this. But again, we cannot take anything away from the Romans. What they built upon this entire area is just absolutely amazing, which you will see. The construction that they started somewhere around 15 BC and continued for many, many years after. This was the biggest project that Rome has ever endeavored in outside of Rome. It was a place that they treasured dearly, and you will see the evidence of that. I just want to just brief what we're going to do. So you see the picture there. That is the entire complex. We have the Propylaea, which we're going to walk into, which is to the right. Then through the Hexagonal Court. Through there is the Great Court. And then in the far back is the temple, the actual temple of Jupiter, the highest one that you see in the picture. Over to the left of that is the Bacchus Temple. And then we're going to be seeing a little bit of the outer wall, the megaliths there, and also the Trilithon. And a little bit amount we're going to be looking at the Venus Temple, which is all the way to the left front of that picture right there. So let's go. So this is what the Propylaea might have looked like in Roman times. It was definitely something that they took a lot of pride in, and it was probably built during the reign of Caracalla from 211 to 217 AD, somewhere around there. So it was built way after, so it was definitely an afterthought, but still very large and very magnificent and very important to the Romans. So this was basically just a forecourt, just an area where people would gather before they would actually get into the other courts, which actually was before the temple as well. So there's many layers to this. So right away we see the granite from Aswan that was brought in from Egypt, and that's a whole nother video on how the pre-dynastic people, again, it's this ancient culture, would have sculpted, shaped, cut granite the way that they did to build pyramids and so on and so forth. But the Romans, again, did not shape that. They just brought these over, of course, because they were very involved with Egypt. So you can see it's not a big, gigantic area. It's the basic entrance to it as we approach the Hexagonal Court. So this court was definitely a very, very special place. It was very sacred, and it was a place where people possibly came in, left their belongings before they went into the temple, maybe had prayer. It was speculated that there was dancers in this area preparing for the nightly events and so on and so forth. So 4 of the 6 sides of this court were occupied by porticos supported by 30 columns of Egyptian granite, more granite from Aswan, Egypt. Some scholars speculate that this is of Semitic design, which would have meant it went back to the Phoenician period and then the Romans would have built around that, but others think not. So due to its shape, it was speculated that this is definitely unique in its building style, and it was questioned for many, many years because of that. And it's also speculated that the shape had to do with astronomical reasons, and therefore the stairs on each side would allow people to get up and do some stargazing. And built somewhere around 244, 249 BC by Philip Arabis. So now let's get to the Great Courtyard. So here we are at the Great Court. Now this is a very large court before the temple itself, and it's just as intriguing as the temple. And I find this to be a very, very fascinating part of this entire complex. And that has to do with, it dates back to the Phoenician period and the Canaanites. So this area was sacred to the Phoenicians, and the reason is this was an actual temple to Baal-Hadad, which was the main god in this entire area of Lebanon. And I'm going to go into that in a different video. But here, if you can see the area and the actual megaliths that we see are buried underneath the Roman layer. You can see the actual Roman floor where those people are walking, and the megaliths that are underneath. Now they're not as big as the wall, the western wall, or a lot of the monoliths that are supporting the foundation, but they are still massive. And there's different layers of occupation in here, as we see. And the reason why it's not completely dug out is because this area was excavated, and when they were digging, they would have had to destroy the entire Roman ruins. So they decided to stop. So these holes that we see scattered about are just plans that stopped the actual excavation. So that's what we're left with, and I'm glad that they did get down there, because then we can see exactly what's going on. Here, Pierre, the guide, was showing us how the floor, that's Roman floor right there, and how they just completely, put their blocks of stone on top of the older temple. And this was very common in the ancient world. It was a way to show that, it's sacred, and here we are, we're coming in to make our stance in the area, basically marking the area with their culture, and that's exactly what the Romans did here. But it's definitely hiding a lot of megalithic structures that are underneath this great court. So we can see those megaliths again, and we can get a sense of the scale of that. Sherry's going to walk over there and stand there, and those are pretty large. So as you can see, there's a lot of rubble, protected area, obviously. So what is in place, and the only people that can touch it are the people coming in to do the specific work here. So this has been left untouched for a very, very long time. So the one thing that you might want to look for is the different types of people that were here over the course of thousands of years. And what this has gone through, it's gone through wars, it's gone through a lot of different cultures and what it stood for, from the Romans to the Arabs to the Christians. It just goes on and on. And so the landscape has changed, but we see the inner structure, like right here with these are on the top, right? So these obviously are fallen down for many years, but the detail that the Romans did to make this entire complex magnificent, and the detail in the work. Now the walls, you can see, are in different types of stone, are kind of wedged and reshaped. I mean, this has come down and it's been rebuilt, and the peoples that rebuilt them were obviously not technically advanced at all. They needed to build it up as fortresses throughout the years, and all kinds of things. So we see the columns of granite strewn about, pieces on the ground. Most of it, or a lot of it, has been reconstructed, so it can kind of stand back up, and they put metal posts through a lot of the granite columns throughout the entire complex. And we see different types of bowls used for sacrifice, for making liquids, wine. So look at the detail on this. You just see, no one would have been this close to this in that time frame. This was well up on the top layer of the complex. So we get to see that because it's down. But you can see by the size that time was not the issue with the Romans by any stretch of the imagination. They had the wealth, they had the manpower to do a lot of crazy stuff. So we're approaching the end of this side of the Great Courtyard, getting towards the edge of the temple, which is right there. That's the Jupiter temple. And there's some massive megaliths, my friends, right over there. We're going to be on top of those in a little bit, so hang in there with me with this walkthrough because there's so much to see here. So that's the area between the temple and the Bacchus temple. Right there's the Bacchus temple. It's another temple that we'll explore in a little bit. But I want to finish up the Great Court here. The scaffolds you see there are the construction that they're doing on the pillars. So when you normally look at this site, you see those 6 pillars from the Jupiter temple in pictures and online or whatever. But right now you can't see them because it was under those scaffolds. So a little bit more in the courtyard here before we head over to the temple, just to understand and get a feel for what this courtyard is. Remember, this courtyard dates back to the Phoenician period, so it was very sacred. And there were altars that the Romans expanded upon that were originally in place in the time of the Phoenicians. The temple, and we see this is rose granite. This is not. This is what the Romans used. This is what they brought in from Aswan, Egypt. It's the only place that this comes from. It's perfectly cylinder. It's been machined. And the Romans obviously do it in a more chiseled sculpting way. Even though the Roman it looks more impressive when you look at these 2 pieces. It's just the fact that this is granite much harder than this. This is easily workable, and you can make more even cuts and then sand it with rock and sand and water as they make it look. At the time, it would have been much smoother than this and beautiful. But this would have taken much more advanced machining to create the shapes that we see. And this one's pretty battered up. But in other examples, you can see more of the sculpting. So here we have some other interesting designs from all the ruins that we have here in Baalbek. Very interesting stuff. And this guy is obviously a toppled over pillar that was gigantic at one time. And we can see the slicing that was going on for this to be recycled in other areas. So we're walking through, and I'm heading towards the altar of sacrifice. That would have been the smaller one. The one to the right of that, which is in the center of the court, would have been the largest, dating back to the Phoenician times. But the Romans did preserve the second one and obviously used it. So this guy right here was in use during Roman times. And the basins that we see are on both sides of the court, and they would have been used in Roman times as ritual basins or ritual ablutions. So this area must have been extremely, extremely important to the Romans because of the earlier Phoenician beliefs, and they did respect that and worked it into this whole entire complex. And the Romans knew that the Phoenician god Baal had a lot to do with this courtyard and temple. So leaving the court, going into the temple, these steps would have been original. And Pierre, our guide, is showing us right now how big or long and massive this one piece is. So you can just imagine the undertaking. That's one complete piece, slab, starting here and roll in, roll in, roll in. Absolutely incredible. And that's where we end it. And this is what the rest of the area would look like before we enter the Temple of Jupiter, people. The Romans built these steps in odd numbers so that when a person started to climb the stairs with the right foot, he would end up entering the temple with the right foot. So this was apparently some type of ritual. So let's get in the temple. So as we make our way in, the first thing we see are these column bases. And originally there would have been 54 total. And making the way to the edge here, these are the northern blocks, which are completely fascinating, and I do a separate video on this, so check that out. We'll see a little bit of that later on in the video today as well. They are just absolutely crazy. Obviously everything is strewn about, protected. There's the columns that were getting reconstructed. I wish they were open today, but you can see those in pictures. So we're heading towards the opposite side, towards the Bacchus temple. And there's a guard. They have to keep this area well protected. It's good to know. Slightly dangerous place, but we made it happen. We're alive and well. Alright, so let's take a peek over. Look at this platform. So we're going to be jumping on that row in a little bit. Bacchus temple, which we'll see in a little bit. So again, this temple is dedicated to the sun god, brought over from Egypt. Also giving the name of Heliopolis. So it has to be understood that even though the god Baal, his presence was here and understood, he retained his role as the great storm god, provider of rain and fertility of the soil. So he was the storm and fertility god of the Phoenicians. Jupiter was brought over, or the cult of Jupiter was brought over from Egypt in Heliopolis, from the Egyptian city of the sun. And that was brought over in Greek and Roman times. So we have two different type of situations that we're going to be looking into. So we strolled to the back, or actually it's the northern wall, and there's those blocks again that I was talking about earlier. This is how they would have looked from this angle. I was originally standing on top of that niche there, which is right there to the right, filming it from that angle. So this is still, part of the whole Jupiter temple. And this is this little area that you're able to walk out onto and actually see the wall. So we can check out the size of this column. And Pierre is explaining that it's about 6 foot or so. And Anthony, who's on the tour with us, is 6'3". So we're going to measure that up. You can see that that's bigger than him. And this would have been just one of the pieces of one of the columns that would have sat on those bases. So we can see the amount of work that the Romans did put into this. And I do want to stress, for people that are looking at these monstrous structures, we're not talking about the ancient civilization making this stuff. This stuff is completely Roman. The Roman built a massive temple here. They built some massive things. But what we're talking about and trying to prove is that they didn't work with granite, rose granite, the way that they did with this limestone. It's a much different material. So we can't take away from anything that the Romans have done. The amount of work is extraordinary.
10 generations of slaves they work here. Can you imagine?
So now here are the massive blocks that I was explaining earlier that we were going to jump on, that are inside or in between the Jupiter temple and the Bacchus temple, right there. So we're actually on top of those. And of course all the ruins that have fell on top of them. A little more detail of the Roman work. The in-between area to Bacchus, like I said, we're going to get to there in a little while, but just to get a sense of scale, these are massive blocks that we are walking on, clearly cut by no civilization that we know of. Remember, these are the blocks that we are talking about that are not cut by the Romans. These were here in place before they got here, the ones we're walking on. Obviously the rubble to the left is Roman. And we're approaching the megalithic wall and get an idea of the cut marks on top, which could have been done by pretty much any civilization that came after. So there's the sense of scale. Sherry's against that wall. That's a pretty massive, massive, massive piece. Single piece. And we'll take a stroll down the length of this wall that we were just walking on. Get another sense of scale of this. Now, let's be real. The size of these. Crazy, crazy, crazy. In between area. A lot was going on here. A lot was going on here in ancient times. Right to the end. So on the way to the entrance of the Bacchus Temple, we can see some of the construction, that nice seam going on over there. And like I said earlier, this is a very large temple. It's not as big as the Temple of Jupiter, but it is larger than the Pantheon of Athens. So we're talking about a very, very large temple. And as you will see shortly, the inside of this is just insane. So this temple is dedicated to the god Bacchus. Bacchus is the god of wine, among many other titles that he had. The Phoenicians also had a god named Adonis, and this was also an equivalent to Bacchus, as well as others. So it kind of gets convoluted down the chain, but there is a relation still going to the Phoenician times. So that's for another day. We see the columns, and here are a little bit smaller than we saw at the temple, but nonetheless still pretty impressive. And about 46 to 50 of these columns would have been around this temple. It depends where you read. There's always a discrepancy in every type of thing, but it's still a lot. And this gate is definitely massive. This was a special part of this temple. It had some engravings on each side that, ironically enough, I didn't see when I came in. So I'm going to have to investigate that. I don't know if they were taken away, but how do you take away an engraving? And that's where one of them would have been, right in that corner of the gate. But anyway, perplexing. Every time you think you got something nailed, then the next time you look, it's gone. Very bizarre. Anyway, so look at the height of this place. This is pretty insane. And it is the best preserved Roman temple. So here we have a lot of rituals were taking place. Obviously a lot of prayer, festivals, a lot of wine drinking, and a lot of drunk Romans running around. Just kidding. But built somewhere around 150 to 250 AD. So it was relatively much later than the Temple of Jupiter. And again, because the empire was expanding, Rome was just branching out at the peak of their existence. I'm standing now in the front, and this is what the priests would have seen. This is where they would have stood and conducted their service. And there's chambers to each side of this building where they would actually came out of, and God knows where they lead into. You can check out the size from where I am now.
All right, we have reached the famous Trilithon, or Trilithon, however you want to pronounce it. In the Jupiter Temple, these blocks are estimated at 900 tons each, and they're on other massive stones and blocks that are a little bit less tonnage than the 900 tons. But to get a scale of this, you can see Sherry is below them. So they are above where she's pointing. So she's pointing to a row of blocks. Put your arm up. There we go. You can see her arm doesn't even go halfway up this block. But the Trilithon number 1 is above that, which I'm got in there. So if we follow this now.
All the way up.
So we have Trilithon number 1, starting not quite at the edge as you saw. And it travels not to there, because that is a break. And archaeologists have been studying this and guesstimating this for many years. The seam actually is right there of stone number 1. Where Sherry was, Trilithon stone number 1. Seam number 1. Traveling into the second block, which goes all the way And this is 1 block each. This seam of number 2 is underneath the scaffolding, which I'm going to try to make you see. You can. So if you look clearly and I blow this up here, the seam is actually under. Now if there was no scaffolding here, this would be much easier, but the seam is there, where the rag is, to the left of the rag and down. You can see where that block is actually coming down. So, or towel, whatever that is, there. So it's a little bit to the left of that, where that seam is. And that starts the number 3 block, which goes, you can see it clearly how that stops with the other stones, which is that there. So that is 3 blocks only at 900 tons each, where Sherry is standing. Incredible. Not only is that incredible, but just the rocks, the stones that they are on, and the foundation stones as well. Which will, since we got this shot on here. And by the way, this does go underground. So we have these blocks are not even or sitting on the ground, but they actually go under. That's far. Here's our Trilithon number 2 ending, and where's number 3 or number 1? Going all the way back here. Trilithon number 1. Should have a stabilizer on this, but I don't. And right back where we started.
Welcome back.
Right at that seam. So there you have it.
Just a bit of history about the legends about who built the temple. It was supposedly, like I said, built by the Romans, because they built on top of it, and they certainly did build on top of it. But the platform itself and whatever existing structure was on top of that at the time is no longer there. We only see the Roman ruins now. So the tradition has it that Cain, from the biblical Cain, built Baalbek after he was cursed. Also built it in the year 133 of creation. That's another legend. The Arabs' legend is that Nimrod, who reigned over Lebanon, was angry at the god and built the infamous Tower of Babel. That's a very common story, and various others. Now, looking at it from the wall from the opposite side, so Chester now is on top of that rock, where he's just below the Trilithon, and this row is the north wall that I was referring to many times. This row is absolutely insane. Just as insane as the Trilithon. Which I think so anyway. But now we're going to get a better look at this wall. So we're coming in from a different direction than I just showed you from the Trilithon side, or the west side. There's some gunshot shells. That's fun. Not really. But as you can see, the wall starts here, and we're going to walk towards the Trilithon where we were just at. So, but just have to scratch your head a moment and look at the sheer size of these 9 blocks. 9, okay? It feels like we're going to walk a mile. Soak this in, because if you can't get the Baalbek, this north wall you will never see. Yes, there's some other videos, but you're watching this now, so that means pay attention. because this freaking wall is crazy. Foundation. Massive blocks. Estimated 450 tons, possibly around there, fitting together so perfectly, as you can see. It's darker color than the rest of the same blocks that we saw inside the temple and in between the temple, which I'm talking about, the Jupiter temple and the Bacchus temple. So the in-between where we were on top of them, these are the same size blocks, but those were much more brown. And there's a lot of different reasons why this could be blackened. It's been speculated by fires. It's definitely subjected to a much more battle than the inside, especially being, on the outside perimeter. So for those who would like to find out a lot more about this wall, I do go into the inside of this in a different video. So definitely check for the Northwestern Wall video. So now we're going to get to the Temple of Venus, and as you can see in the picture, as I stated at the beginning of the video, it's off to the left. It's not even really part of the complex of the other temples, but it is across the street a bit. And originally this was built in the 3rd century, and we can't get into the Temple of Venus, but we certainly got a good glimpse of it. It's really very, very close to the street, where we got some good footage and some good photos of it. But you can see it's the same type of ruins. There's granite from Aswan, Egypt as well, and it was used heavily during the Christian era. So I want to thank you guys for taking this walkthrough with me of Baalbek and the temples. I'm just completely out of my skin. This is one of the most fascinating places on earth, and I really hope that you enjoyed this. And please check out the other videos that I have out on Baalbek. Mind-blowing stuff. So thank you so much again for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.